Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to CogX 2021, the extravaganza of enlightened discussion, great technology, insight, and some fabulous speakers. So this afternoon, we're continuing on in our education and EdTech stream, where we've had a number of really interesting sessions this morning, including talking about blockchain, about talking about the whole fundamentals of education and the impact that EdTech can make. And today we're taking a little bit, this afternoon we're taking a little bit more personal to look at whether schools are actually working. I mean, you could argue in some cases that people could argue that actually we're maybe, you know, have moved on from the traditional school world that we've known for so many years. And obviously with COVID, let alone the technological advances, those things are challenged. But we've got a fabulous panel to help us through with this today. First of all, is our host and chair for this session is Zoe Tabary. Zoe's the tech editor for Thomson Reuters Foundation. So Zoe, welcome. And then she'll have with her Elena Sinel, who's the co-founder of Teens in AI, and then Nadeem, who's the co-founder of TKS. So hopefully these guys will qualify to talk about this subject, and you've got about 40 minutes to do so. So submit any questions you want, and Zoe, over to you.
Thanks very much, Phil. Thank you, and hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're based. Very warm welcome to you all, and thank you so much for joining this CogX panel. We're delighted to have you with us. I'm Zoe Tabary. I'm the tech editor and the acting editor-in-chief of the Thomson Reuters Foundation, which is the charitable arm of Thomson Reuters. And I'm delighted to be your host today. As Phil says, today we're going to be talking about school systems around the world, the extent to which they're fading for some into obsolescence, and crucially, how they can remain relevant. We're going to look at how to better prepare students worldwide for an increasingly digitized future, from engaging them with AI and other tech earlier on, and also looking at the future of schooling and perhaps whether it might revolve more around things like personalized education. I'm joined by a terrific panel to discuss those issues today. We have Nadeem Nathoo, who's the co-founder of the Knowledge Society, a human accelerator that trains young people aged 13 to 17 to solve important problems in the world using emerging tech like AI, virtual reality, genomics, and more. His goal is to build the future of education and unlock human potential around the world. And TKS students have spoken at some of the world's biggest conferences, worked at companies like IBM and Microsoft, raised money from some of the world's biggest investors, and working on projects in areas such as quantum computing and genetic engineering. And before his role at TKS, Nadeem was a management consultant at McKinsey & Company, an early adopter in the blockchain space. He also angel invests in young people in his spare time. We're also joined by Elena Sinel, who is a multi-award-winning social entrepreneur and founder of Teens in AI, where she's motivated to make a difference in the world by empowering young people aged 12 to 18 to also solve real problems through artificial intelligence. Teens in AI was launched at the UN AI for Good Global Summit with the mission to improve diversity and inclusion in AI. Teens in AI recently partnered with Microsoft to scale Girls in AI across 150 countries. I'm going to hand over to each one of them for some opening remarks. We'll then have a discussion for about 10 minutes or so, and finally take questions from you, our audience, which should take us to just about 40 minutes. If you do have a question, please post it using the chat function and mention your company and job if you feel comfortable doing so. And I'll then field those to the panelists so we don't have to go through the all too familiar pains of people muting and unmuting themselves. Please do also feel free to tweet using hashtag CogX 2021. And finally, in the interest of transparency, I should add that today's session is being recorded and you will be able to find the link afterwards on the site. I'm now going to hand over to Nadeem and Elena and put the same question to the both of them. Nadeem, if I could start with you, and would love to hear your thoughts on to what extent do the skills taught in education systems around the world today meet the needs of employers and the needs of society more widely? And what do you think needs to change?
Thanks, Zoe, and thanks everyone for being here. The thesis of TKS is that there's not enough smart people in the world working on hard problems. And it's not because there's not as many smart people in the world. It's just oftentimes when you work on these hard problems, you do so despite the system, not because of the system. And if you think about what the education, quote unquote, system is right now, the formalized system, especially K-12 and even university, you're taking a bunch of people, you're putting them in similar environments with the same type of person in front of the room with the same type of content. And so how do you expect people to do anything differently to get a different result, right? That's kind of Einstein's definition of insanity. You can't expect to do the same thing and expect a different result. But that's almost what it seems like, right? Employers are like, okay, we need people to have certain knowledge, skills, mindsets, and networks to be able to add value day one. But of course, not everyone just comes out of school ready for that. And so it almost feels like we need to do something a little bit different to prepare them. And even when I first started my career at McKinsey, I went to one of the best business schools for undergrad out there, and I probably had a 2-week advantage. And so even when I think about it anecdotally, was I prepared specifically for that role, for that job? The answer is no. And so, we could talk about the hard skills and some of these things later. And I think there's a pretty actually easy fix for how to do that. And I think it's a no-brainer. It's about how can companies get a little bit more involved in this process, in the curriculum design process, the exercises process, like what are actually the young people being exposed to. But let's take a step back from that. Let's actually just think about what are the qualities and traits that we value in people generally. Forget about employees, just people generally. I think we would value problem solving, dealing with ambiguity, communication, collaboration, right? Hopefully those things don't sound controversial at all. It's interesting because in the education system, I would argue we literally teach the opposite, right? There's no room for problem solving. There's always an answer at the back of the textbook. There's no room for ambiguity. You know exactly where you're learning in grade 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We don't teach people how to communicate well, and it's very competitive and it's not collaborative. And this isn't me trying to bash the current system. I'm really just trying to lay out the facts of, what is it that we value and where there's some misalignment. And I think if we do want to make change, we have to focus on these points of friction to just get more aligned as to what employers and people value. We live in a really interesting time right now where content is not the issue. 15, 20 years ago, content was the problem, right? You went to the best school to have access to the best professors, best libraries, etc. Now, if you're a young person and you have a mobile device and internet, you can learn from the smartest people anywhere in the world. That's not the issue, right? There are other things that we need to make sure we are developing in young people. I think exposure of emerging technologies is certainly one of them, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But again, I think we would need to focus on these 4 buckets: knowledge, skills, mindsets, networks, and then intentionally work backwards from a first principles perspective, break them down, and then actually implement change. And of course, I have a lot of tactical ideas and suggestions on how to do that as a human accelerator. But as for my opening remarks, I think I'll keep it to that for now.
Thanks, Nadeem. That's brilliant. A lot of unpack, and from what you've said, not least of which the kind of discrepancy between the kind of skills that are currently taught and what is expected of students in the workplace, but also more broadly. Elena, coming to you, do you also kind of notice in your work that kind of gap between what's being taught and the skills that are needed? And what do you think are really the skills that should be taught students first and foremost?
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be at CogX again. And thank you, Zoe, for welcoming me. So for me, I personally feel there needs to be a rethink in the entire education system. So I would call for an overhaul of the education system as it is right now, whether it's in the UK or anywhere in the world. We're currently working with various governments in Southeast Asia and in the Middle East and in Europe, and wherever I go, the problem is the same. The education system is really not fit for purpose. I would argue further that there is no purpose within the education system. So it lost its purpose, it lost its why. And for us to be able to nurture that sense of purpose within the children, we really need to rethink about what we teach and how we teach. And obviously another crucial aspect is that link with the industry. We have a lot of industry leaders who emphasize the importance of data skills, the importance of AI skills, and soft skills and hard skills. And none of this is unfortunately being taught in schools. And again, this is not really the fault of of the teachers and the schools. It's something, the decision that has to come from the top. It doesn't unfortunately work that way in the UK. Some of the systems we work with, like the system in Brunei, we get to go ahead from the government, and it's top down, and it's much easier to integrate a more novel approaches, more novel frameworks. Whereas in the UK, it's unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. One of my colleagues at university said it would take 18 months to change a comma in the curriculum. It's going to take a long time before change happens. And unfortunately, it's the system, it's the economy that will suffer in the end. We have had the Royal Institute who have really, pushed for an overhaul of the system within the next 10 years. And if that doesn't happen, that we will really see the gaps long term, and we will have that impact on the economy really felt because of that. So for me, the system needs to change, how we teach and what we teach as well. And we need young people who are able to discover their purpose much earlier and are able to discover their passions much earlier. To give you an example, my daughter didn't discover her passion for maths until her dad died of lung cancer. And that was a very interesting thing that happened to her, because she suddenly started asking questions like, shouldn't there be an AI? Shouldn't there be an algorithm that could predict my dad's cancer before it turned to stage 4? If somebody told her that maths could do exactly that, she probably would not have dropped maths, which is another strange thing that's being allowed in the UK education system, which really narrows down the choices and doesn't allow young people to really understand the full potential of maths. I mean, I could go on and rant about how maths is taught so badly in this country and many other countries as well, and how the choices in school are so narrow. It doesn't really give that many options to kids, and how my daughter's college didn't allow her to take maths when she actually realized this is the subject I want to learn, now that I know that it could have saved my dad's life. Too many things that are wrong, and I would just spend the whole day talking about this, but ultimately something needs to happen for this country to really compete with the rest of the world, because we are seeing some countries that are advancing already in adding some of the more advanced curriculum into school education. That's China, that's some of the other Southeast Asian countries. And if this country doesn't pick up, I wouldn't want to make the predictions as to what might happen, but the skills gap, the diversity gap is not something that we're going to bridge anytime soon as a result of that.
Thank you so much, Elena. That's absolutely fascinating. I know, as Nadeem, what you say in terms of the link to the industry, current education systems perhaps not being fit for purpose. And also thank you for so generously sharing that about, your own personal experience. I think that is really evidence that real world problems are so often what can inspire us and inspire kind of the leaders of tomorrow to go into this field, which I think is very often seen perhaps as quite abstract or kind of removed, but as you've explained, can be directly at the source of solving tomorrow's problems. Just as a very quick reminder before I go on to a few follow-up questions to anyone who may have joined us in the interim, if you do have any questions for your panel, please do post those in the chat box. In about 10 minutes or so, I'll be fielding them to both Nadeem and Elena. And if you'd want to leave your kind of job title and company, that'd be fantastic as well. Elena, actually, if I could pick up on some of what you said, and really interested to hear in the experience of teens and AI here. You, from what I understand, kind of empower youth to directly solve real problems through AI. Can you give us some examples of those? And also, could you touch on what, if any, progress we've made specifically in improving diversity and inclusion in the field of AI?
Okay, so I'll begin with the first part of the question. I'll give you a few examples. That we have a team that a couple of years have developed an algorithm that predicted lung cancer, which was very, very similar intuitively to what the Cancer Research Institute here in London have been developing. And that was really exciting because when we introduced them to the Cancer Research Institute, they said, wow, these kids are remarkable. And it only took them three days to figure it out. It was a 10-day accelerator. The team really struggled to identify the problem that they really were all passionate about. So they went with homelessness first, and they realized after speaking to homeless people that every homeless person has got a different reason why they became homeless, and the kind of solutions that could be different. And then they've realized, okay, well, what other problems can we tackle? And eventually they decided, okay, it's going to have to be lung cancer. But the way they went about this problem and trying to find the source and develop the model that predicts cancer was very, very similar to the intuition and methodology that the Cancer Research Institute was doing. In the same vein, last year, the winning project, the winning team of the AI accelerator, Elios, are developing something in partnership with Tavistock and Portman Trust, NHS Trust, which specifically caters for the mental health of young people. And this is an exciting project that hopefully will make an impact to thousands of young people here in London and in the UK. And it's one of the a very unique partnership that we've never really had, between us and a public institution. And we're very excited to see what will happen and how kids are able to develop the kind of solutions that they think or they know is going to help other kids as well.
Sorry, just picking up on what you've said, what kind of format, practically has that interaction taken? Is it, and also crucially in the past year, I mean, is that very much been kind of face-to-face? Is it kind of regular meetings? How does that kind of creativity happen?
Yes, so usually this all happens face to face, but the past year, obviously with the pandemic, we've pivoted online. So all of our programs have taken place online, and these usually take place over Zoom call, Discord, Slack, various online platforms. And we work with mentors directly from the NHS Trust or Cancer Research Trust who come on board as expert mentors. And then we work with the industry to plug the other skills gaps, whether it's in AI or data science or design thinking. So we have a very holistic approach, a very holistic program where we emphasize the importance of design thinking, AI ethics, because we really do want a more ethical Facebook if there is a need to have another Facebook. And we do really emphasize, the importance of working together and the business skills, pitching and everything else. It's not just about AI, it's about how do we use AI or other technologies to solve a real problem in the world. So it's very much based on project-based learning or problem-based approach. And then to respond to your second question, we're very, very far away from bridging that diversity gap. And I would probably be referring to the latest Turing Institute report, Where Are the Women? But then there have also been some very recent reports from Stanford University and AI Now Institute, obviously, and all of these reports, they emphasize, how drastic the situation is in relation to diversity, that we have less than 20% of women in tech and and in AI as well, and less than 13% of women are researchers. And when it comes to people of color, when it comes to neurodiversity or disabilities in AI, there is even less, the numbers are very invisible, very, very difficult to gauge what that number is. And that's across the board, and even in the biggest companies like Facebook, like Google, like Microsoft. So we have a real problem, and the point here that is really, really crucial to take away is there can be no ethical AI until we bridge that diversity gap, because we cannot possibly even think or conceive of creating the kind of technology that will be for everyone if we do not have the right teams, the right expertise within the teams. So it's a real massive problem, and that is one of the issues that we are trying to tackle at Teens in AI, and we're working with a number of industry partners like Capgemini, like MasterCard, like Microsoft, and to really try and address this. So we do develop the kind of curriculum with them that can be used by any teacher, really, but we mostly use it in our programs, and it's very open source, very open for anyone to use to try and understand how technologies work. The really inspiring careers into AI, because many have actually come into these careers from very traditional routes and jobs, and it's really fascinating how people end up in this industry. And we want to encourage this because we need as many voices as we possibly can get to understand everything related to AI, and most importantly, be part of the creation, the development of these future technologies.
Thank you. As you say, huge kind of progress still to be made in terms of diversity, and that needing to happen at the source as well. Nadeem, I'd like to come to you, and kind of similarly to Elena, I'd be fascinated in hearing how TKS practically kind of function as a human accelerator that trains people to solve real world problems. How has that worked in practice, and how do you think, if at all, it could be incorporated into education systems?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because so the learning methodology between Teens and AI and TKS is very similar in terms of it being project-based learning, starting with a why, being very focused on the problem, and then work backwards and figure out what tools do you actually need to be able to address these problems, not really just learn the tool and then, get to grade 12 or at the end of university and be like, hey, how the heck do I use this tool, right? Elon Musk talks about it. Instead of teaching people how to use a wrench, instead of teaching people how to use a screwdriver, like, let's teach people what an engine is, why an engine is important. Now let's take apart this engine. Oh, you need a screwdriver to do this. You need a wrench to do this, etc. So you have students coming into TKS, not even knowing how to code. And keep in mind, they're between the ages of 13 to 17 years old. And 10 months later, doing things like one of our students cured a disease called muscular dystrophy in mouse models. We just got word a couple months ago that they're on human trials. One of our students, Ben, built a ring that can non-invasively measure blood glucose and cholesterol levels without penetrating the skin. This is like real-time monitoring of heart disease, diabetes. It's like the holy grail of biometrics, but it actually works, right? And it was some 16-year-old kid who is now 19 who developed this technology. And by the way, it's not like a Theranos thing. It actually works. We have students building machine learning algorithms to accelerate R&D of batteries. So typically, and supercapacitors, typically the R&D cycles of supercapacitors, which are kind of like batteries, but instead of chemical-based, they're electricity-based, are 6 to 12 months. They were able to bring it down to 6 to 12 days, and they've started a company around this, et cetera, right? So the whole point here is that TKS is extracurricular, right? It happens during the school system. We have them on the weekends, like actually their undivided attention only for 3 hours. And then throughout the week, we have our infrastructure in place where our directors are working directly with the students. But the whole point here is that we have a fraction of the amount of time that school has, and we're able to see some pretty incredible results. And the common misconception is that these kids are super geniuses and they've been working on this stuff before. No, that is not the case. We don't ask for grades. We don't care about age, right? As long as you're between the 13 to 17 bracket. All we care about is, are you curious? Do you have some level of drive or ambition? And are you willing to put in the work? And you don't even need to have all three. You just need to have 2 of the 3 because we can train the other one, right? Imagine you were the person at the back of the class who was super ambitious and wanted to do, the big thing, but didn't really have a strong work ethic because, people never told them why, right? Or encouraged them how to get there. Imagine you're the person who was working really hard and trying to get the 99% or the 100% at the top right-hand corner of the piece of paper, but no one ever told you could think big. And that's what I think education is supposed to be, given the tools and resources that we have today. When we think about how we...
I was going to say, sorry, just on the example you mentioned, which I think is a great one of the student who got involved with TKS and didn't even know how to code. How did they initially get involved then? Did the students have to express kind of interest? Was this kind of through the teachers? How did they initially get involved with TKS?
Yeah, and by the way, I want to clarify, it's not the student who came in who didn't even know how to code. All of the students, pretty much, I would say 99% come in not even knowing how to code. That's what I'm saying. I think it's a common misconception. And then, 10 months go by and they're building some really amazing projects. I would say like master's and PhD level projects in a short period of time. And how they get involved is, it's normally through schools and organizations, but it goes back to Elena's point, which talks about the why, right? Mm-hmm. We want to train people to solve important problems in the world. So a lot of time you'll ask a young lady, right? You'll say, what do you want to be when you grow up? The classic question. And they might say, I want to be a doctor. Nothing to do with tech. I want to be a doctor. It's like, why do you want to be a doctor? Because I want to help people. Oh, did you know that you can use a machine learning algorithm to detect skin cancer 10% more accurately than dermatologists? Oh, cool. So this is a tool that I can use to get the result that I want. Not label myself as a techie, not label myself as someone like, someone who shies away from code. because of the thing, but it's like, oh, I want to help people. These are high leverage tools I can use to be able to help people. And I think that's what's really important. The challenge with integrating it into the education system is that most of the teachers and people who are facilitating this need to understand this central premise, right? They need to also understand the role that these technologies can play as high leverage tools to solve important problems, and not necessarily, promoting and advocating for the tools themselves, because then they will feel like frauds from an identity perspective. Because most we're in 5 years, we're not going to be able to ramp up all of these teachers on AI, quantum, nanotech, gene editing, stem cells. That's not going to be the case. And what's interesting is if you think about it 15, 20 years ago, right? Let's say 97 to 2002, people were talking about internet companies, right? And the skills that you need to build an internet company, coding as an example. And people were like, oh, I'm not interested in the internet. I'm not interested in the internet companies. Fast forward now, virtually every company is an internet company in some fashion, even if it's just marketing or having a website or collecting payments, whatever the case it is. And so it's almost silly right now for us to be talking about, oh, should we get kids into AI? And we're seeing AI companies right now. And 5 to 10 years from now, there's going to be no such thing as AI startups. It's just going to be startups. Every company, every product, especially that's digital, is going to have some sort of AI attached to it, right? And if we take that same lens, and if we really believe that, then we got to figure out how to start incorporating these things now. And the good news is today versus 15, 20 years ago, we have the infrastructure, right? We have virtual delivery methods. We have amazing online courses. All you have to do is give exposure and permission and a forcing function in your classroom to say, hey, do Andrew Ng's course on Coursera as a high-level intro. Andrew Ng's course is probably a little bit outdated, but I think you get the point, right? It's there. You don't even have to tell them how to teach it. You have the best people in the world delivering it. All you have to do is give them permission, guide them to the place, and then give them the forcing function, which I actually think schools do really well. I think it's terrible, though, but it does get people to get the job done, which is tests, right? People feel like if you gave a kid a test 3 days from now or 3 months from now, they will make sure they learn whatever they need to learn to get it done 3 days from now or 3 months from now, right? And so I think these forcing functions are powerful. I actually don't like the way that kids and young people are being evaluated and graded. I think that leads to competition. I think it sets a cap for learning versus being uncapped. But this whole idea around forcing functions is really important. And I think if we can do those things, so empower teachers and give them the perspective of tools to solve problems, we can create forcing functions for young people to learn about these and give them the permission and then give them guidance of where they can go. Those are 3 actually very easy and central tenets that you can give to someone in a Notion guide or a playbook that they can start implementing, and then they just have to have the willingness to do so.
And to your point about incorporating, these skills and this really new way of thinking into education systems, this makes me think of some research in a previous job we conducted for Google Education, which specifically kind of quizzed teachers and parents on and businesses on what they identified as skills of the future. And I remember that when we asked teachers what they saw as the biggest barriers to kind of implementing that thinking now, top barrier was a lack of time in a very strictly regulated curriculum. So how kind of working with the curricula that we do have, how do we manage that? Do you think that both of the types of initiatives you're doing, that those are kind of destined to be extracurricular, that there is, and also crucially how we get teachers on board as well? Does it mean that for each of those, we need this kind of multi-tier approach where we have it for the students, we also get the kind of teachers on board? How do you see that happening with the way education systems are currently?
Yeah, so this time piece is really important because I think that a lot of young people are actually wasting their time in the current education system. Here's what I mean by that. It is not a waste of time if you retain the content. It is not a waste of time if you build the skills. But what happens, right? You get the 99% in calculus. 10 years later, 5 years later, you have no idea how to do calculus, right? But at the time, you did it because you memorized some things and then you got the mark. Whereas if you think about what are the skills that we learned on the job, so running TKS, getting into the blockchain space, working at McKinsey, and I can only speak for myself, but I probably retain 95% of the knowledge and skills and mindsets and networks. And so it really is about the how you are spending your time. And if you are spending your time memorizing, regurgitating, everybody over the age of 20, everybody who's gone through the system knows that that is not the best way to retain information. So it's kind of like this secret that the older generation is keeping from younger people and just letting them go through this weird facade, right? And being like, and then doing the gotcha as soon as they finish university and being like, surprise, actually, here's actually how you start learning. And it's interesting because life is probably the best human development institution, but it's very unstructured, it's very serendipitous, and it should not be, because if we have a system that is intentionally designed to be a human development vehicle, why is it the case where, 5 to 10 years later, after you leave, you don't really retain a lot of the stuff? And so I think that's, to answer your question, it's just about how do you actually make sure that how you're spending your time is high leverage. And I do think it is about project-based learning. I do think it is about experiential learning. I think it is about working with other people and building relationships. Those are the things that last. What doesn't last is memorization and regurgitation. And unfortunately, that's probably around like 70 to 90% of how the system is built today.
So kind of, yeah, as you say, reallocating resources or reprioritizing as opposed to placing ever-increasing demands on kind of students and teachers. And following on from this, Elena, perhaps a question for you and from your experience with teens and AI as well. A question we've just had from Thomas, and to anyone else who wants to ask questions, please do post those in the chat box. We have as a question, how can parents, crucially, help their kids be prepared for the world in 2030, for example? Parents who they themselves have already been through the education system. So how do we kind of engage with them, if at all, as they obviously still play a huge role in their kids' education?
Yes, absolutely. I think the trend we see is parents who are educated, or parents who've been, to school, universities, and are in tech. They're more likely to send their kids to hackathons, to extracurricular activities, to TKS and various other providers out there. It's the parents who haven't had that exposure is where I'm interested in. How do we bring that awareness of the importance of these concepts that we're teaching to the parents who may not have gone to school, may not see those opportunities, and maybe the school, the kids are just not fortunate to go to the school where the teachers are very enthusiastic about new technologies. But these are the kids and these are the parents who I would love to reach and give them this opportunity to really understand how programs like hackathons and accelerator programs and the incredible program that is run in Canada by TKS, how this can really transform a young person's understanding of the world, and how they can also be part of this incredible, the making of those technologies and solving real problems. These are the parents. So we are working across lots of different countries right now. The latest campaign we ran was across 23 countries. And it's very encouraging to see teenagers, girls in particular, participate in hackathons across the globe. But it still is, we're just scratching the surface, because a lot of kids we're trying to reach are the kids who don't have access to the basic infrastructure. And we don't have to go very far, Zoe. Here in London, we have so many kids who don't have access to Wi-Fi. And what the pandemic has shown us, there is that, poverty in relation to access to technologies, access to Wi-Fi. And those are the kids that are really missing out on what we're trying to teach, unfortunately, it's the technology that we were hoping would democratize access is at the same time creating that divide and showing us those inequalities. So the parents who have got it all, obviously definitely engage your kids in hackathons, and if you have access to technology and Wi-Fi, the best thing you can give to your child right now is give them the opportunity to participate in these extracurricular activities like TKX, like Teens and AI. We run hackathons constantly. The next one is in Dubai. Unfortunately, probably not my sort of most favorite part of the world. I wish there were more hackathons happening in parts of Africa, Southeast Asia, where I definitely have got more interested in terms of impact. But we are definitely seeing teachers now reaching out, asking for curriculum and wanting to implement our AI for Good hackathon framework in their school. We have a teacher who is running 3 of these hackathons over, each hackathon, not over a 2-day period, but over a 12-week, 10 to 12 week. So I want to unleash that entrepreneurship amongst teachers. And I want to give them that playbook and say, here's what we do. How will this apply in your school? Why don't you be creative? But again, most of the teachers that reach out are teachers who have got the time, who are in private schools. And it's, again, the teachers that are under-resourced, are in state schools, in schools that are not really that well-wired to the rest of the world, are the teachers that I really want to reach. And again, it's about working with the government and the industry together, making sure the kids have got access, and we have got the kind of really simple resources where a teacher doesn't need to be an AI engineer or doesn't even need to know any Python or anything, that it's just the click of the button where they can just facilitate the curriculum rather than be everything. That's what I'm trying to implement in some of the schools and some of the systems around the world. And I'll keep you updated on how this goes. But right now we're training 55 teachers in Brunei, and we will be training more in the Middle East. And I will definitely let you know how that goes. But it's a very interesting project. Yeah, thank you.
Zoe, can I comment?
Yeah,
can I comment on the parent piece?
Yes, and please, and while you do, because this will probably actually be, sadly, running out of time, our last question, if you can also, when you do, any thoughts, Nadeem, on how we ensure that we don't end up with a kind of 2-tier track system where we end up increasing inequality and only those who do have access to technology get a say in all of this creativity and innovation?
Yeah, well, the good news is in a lot of parts of the world, many people have access to a mobile device and internet. Now, what I think we do need to, what is inevitable and what we need to do for everybody who wants access to these services gets them. And that is an infrastructure problem. That is like literally digging, it's kind of like Starlink, Elon sending satellites into space to be able to provide internet down to everyone. There were things like Project Loon, which is what Google was trying to do, like the internet for all type initiatives. Those are like very physical, hard things that just need to happen. But if you do have access to a device and you do have access to internet, you have access to 99% of the same information that I have or that Elon has or really anyone else has. And so that's the good news, right? The good news is that a lot of people do have this infrastructure, and it's about how to use it. And this kind of goes back to the question that I wanted to address about what can parents do, because I think parents have a really important and big role to play. Let me just say this, not every young person needs to get into technology necessarily to be happy and live a meaningful and fulfilled life, right? And so I would say the high level heuristic is your child curious? Is your child not lazy? Doesn't have to be a super strong work ethic, but are they just not lazy? And do they have a bias towards action? Meaning, are they spending a lot of time thinking, or are they actually doing stuff and putting things out into the world? I think if your child is doing those 3 things from a character perspective, and that's something that you can identify and help train, I think they're probably on a good path in life. Like, you don't know where life is going to go, right? But I think if you have those 3 kind of characteristics and traits, you'll be fine. And then what I think as a parent is really important for you to do to help with is help with the exposure piece, specifically on problems and these tools. And then if young people end up falling in, and gravitating to some of these tools, great. How do we keep up that momentum? But it's impossible to fall in love with something or get excited about something if you don't know what that is, right? We do this thing at the beginning of TKS where we ask a young person, or we ask young people who come into TKS, name all the possible careers you can name, right? If you had to guess, just kind of do it in your head, how many careers, all of the, including garbage, man, nurse, whatever the case it is, it's 13 on average, only 13. And so it's impossible to even conceive of being a nano fabrication technician if you don't know what that is, right? And so I think that's why that exposure is really important. And I think that that's some of the things that parents can do is be intentional about, be like, hey, have you heard about this? Or, hey, have you tried this? Or, hey, check out this YouTube channel. Or like, hey, why don't you spend some time just researching on yourself to drive that curiosity?
Thanks so much to both of you. I'm so sorry to have to cut this short because I think we could go on for hours still. But thank you so much for joining, to our audience as well for your questions. If you haven't had a chance to ask, please do get in touch on Twitter with any of us or with the CogX team. And until then, thank you very much for your time, and have a great rest of the week. And I'll hand back to Phil. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Zoe, and thank you, Nadeem and Elena. That was fascinating. And it's just the enthusiasm you guys have for this subject. And, you know, the size of the challenge we know is huge to really change the education system around the world. But the energy you're bringing to it and the practical, you know, efforts you're making is just inspiring. So great debate, some really good takeaways from there, I think, for people. And as Zoe said, if there are other questions, I'm sure we can, you know, take those out of line and get them over to the panel. But thank you so much for that. We'll hand you back to the floor now, and look forward to our next session, which starts on the hour at 3 o'clock UK time. So thank you very much, everybody.